You're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy Focus.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. My name is Daniel Dopp, here with my best friend Mike Clay. Just a two-person show today as our buddy Field Yates is off getting surgery, unfortunately. Obviously wish you very, very, very good things, Field. Hopefully everything comes out well. Mike, I think my big concern, I got to say this, my biggest concern about Field getting surgery is that he's going to come back and it's going to be like a Rookie of the Year thing. And he's going to be Henry Rowan-Gardner. Now his rotator cuff is like he's throwing Josh Allen-type fastballs to us the next time we head down to the Bahamas.
Yeah, that's true. And he's going to be, more importantly, he's going to be really relaxed, full of energy.
Oh, yeah.
In here, firing on all cylinders. But I'm just glad that he's not here because I watched what Alan Lazard did on Monday Night Football, and I texted him throughout that. For the record, I think he dozed off for the first touchdown. I don't know if he made it back through, but yeah, I was texting him throughout that whole thing. And I would say, for the record, I know he was spiking the ball a little yesterday on the show.
He was a little bit.
Dragging a little. One touchdown was offsides where he just threw it up there.
Yep.
And they were down by 20 points at that point.
Yes, they were. Yes.
Second touchdown. Aaron Rodgers wasn't even in the game, so he's talking about that chemistry between Rodgers and Lazard. It was garbage time. The game was over, and Tyrod Taylor, threw him the touchdown. So nonsense. Zero waiver claims for Lazard. Look, he's going to play. He'll play a little bit the next few weeks until Mike Williams ramps up, but and he'll probably be the 3 at some point. It's just not going to be consistent production, so I don't want to hear about it. Okay?
Yeah. Well,
that was a lucky week 1 call, and it's trash, and I'm not happy about it.
And I'm not happy about it. You know what, Mike? You're allowed to say that. Actually, it's very great because if Field had been here, he absolutely would have eviscerated you about that call. You know that for a fact.
No, I would have used logic and reason to explain why he got lucky, and he would have had to take it, and so he chose shoulder surgery over that.
Yeah, that's exactly how it worked out. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Field obviously hoping you the best, hoping things turn out very well. We'll see him back on Fantasy Football Now on Sunday morning, so he will be back, and then he's going to be back for the rest of Fantasy Focus starting next week. One other thing I want to mention before Mike and I dive into what is our Week 2 rankings show. Wednesdays are always our big rankings days. I just want to give a shout-out to one of our teammates, Liz Loza. Signed a multi-year extension to stay here at ESPN, be a part of ESPN Liz. Fantasy. We saw that come out yesterday. She was absolutely one of the best things that ESPN Fantasy has ever done. So great to be able to have her be a part of the team, and pumped to have her be here for the long term.
Yeah, she's the best. I'm glad she's part of Fantasy Football Now every Sunday. Absolute rock star. And I just wish she was around here more. So
I know, right?
Our content. She could be sitting here with us right now talking ball. But well, she'll be up for FF Now in the pod quite a bit throughout the season, and that's it's great news for all of us.
We'll have some fun with that. I love doing props that pop with her that come out every Friday or Saturday, depending on when you are able to read it. And also, she does Facts versus Feelings, which comes out on Wednesdays today. In honor of Liz Loza signing that multi-year extension, go and check out Facts versus Feelings for Week 2, one of the best things that she does all week. All right, Mike, you and I are going to talk about a handful of things, but first I want to ask you, before we get into the rankings, last thing, because you were not here either the last 2 days, we didn't get like a Week 1 takeaway from Mike Clay as to what you thought about Week 1, all the craziness that happened. What were your big things when you were watching this? Like, what's the big takeaway for you after the first week of football?
Well, look, all offseason we spent talking about how, like, it's the year of the tight end, and that's not what I had in mind for the year of the tight end. I didn't realize we meant the year the tight end disappears from NFL offenses.
Right.
That was the biggest shocker for sure. 5 touchdowns by tight ends. And out of 32 teams, there was 5 total tight end touchdowns.
That's crazy.
Couldn't believe it. And who would have thought the highlight of the week would be on Thursday night in the opener? Isaiah Likely, a guy who was not in most lineups. He's the guy that by far was the top scoring fantasy tight end. So disastrous for that position.
I thought it was interesting that 2 Saints tight ends were inside the top, like 6.
Foster Moreau was the second scoring.
Yeah, and Taysom Hill was not one of those 2 tight ends for what it's worth.
Unbelievable. So better days are ahead. You know, those guys, we'll get into some of the tight ends, but a lot of those guys are strong bounce back candidates.
Yeah.
I think it was just a fluky week 1. If this had happened in week 7, we might not even noticed, really. Or would we just mention it in passing? But that was kind of a shocker because of all the hype around that position going into the season. I don't know if defenses are keying more on those guys or whatever it is, but teams will adjust and better days ahead. And again, I think one of the big stories there is in terms of adjusting and going forward is going to be the Ravens tight ends, which again is on the docket for us today. So we'll get into that.
Yeah, love it. All right. Without any further ado, let's talk week 2 wide receiver rankings. All right, we're going to look at these, kind of break them down into tiers of 5, Mike. Wide receivers 1 through 5, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra, and Jamar Chase. I got to say, the one thing that stands out to me there, Cooper Kupp might be the best value that people got in drafts at the wide receiver spot so far this year. He jumped a huge amount, obviously, from week 1 to week 2, in part because Puka Nacua, we know,
that's the main
out for 4 weeks, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, Nacua played, 20, he was on the field for about 20 snaps, and he had 4 targets and 1 or 2 carries. He was going to be a big part of that offense, and Cooper Kupp was going to have a big game because they had to throw the ball so often in that game, right? It was a competitive game. They were trying to keep up. It was close. They were throwing the ball. It was part of the game plan. They weren't running well, which, by the way, was not a surprise. Detroit
against the Lions
allowed was the lowest, was the fewest fantasy points to running backs last year, the lowest yards per carry, one of those 2. They were outstanding against that, against running backs, and they showed it again in that game. They were terrific against Kyren Williams. So a game plan of throwing the football heavily was not surprising. So Kupp was going to have a lot of volume regardless. However, Nacua,
21 targets we did not have on our docket.
No, 21 targets, yeah, and then a couple carries. But Nacua obviously was a big part early on, and then he gets injured, and that helped Kupp. But that's why he moved up so high in my rankings. He looks like same old Cooper Kupp. Yes, I mean, the per-target efficiency wasn't through the roof by any means. However, just with Nacua's target share of, about a quarter of the targets out, it's very clear that Stafford's going to feature Cooper Kupp. And look, he had a 26% target share last season. The 2 years prior, when he was healthy, when he was on the field, he was like in the 31 to 32% range. So a little uptick makes sense here. And if you give a wide receiver like Kupp with Matthew Stafford under center 30% of the targets, he's going to be a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. So for the next month, he should be safely a top 5 option.
Yeah, 43.8% target share in week 1, which is just unreal. I'll say this. The one thing about watching that game, that offensive line looked brutal. I mean, Matthew Stafford did not have any time to be able to sit back in the pocket, let plays develop. And so it was like, hey, we're doing quick outs. We're doing quick hitters to my guy over and over and over again. I hope that for Matthew Stafford's sake, that line can give him a little bit more time. But that's one of those things where you don't have a lot of time to be able to throw there. Like Stafford was just getting the ball out quickly to his safety blanket.
Yeah, something I'm going to talk about today and we will over the next few days is, week 1's always an overreaction week. And there's variables that substantially affect the volume for players, and I just mentioned game script with Kupp here. For example, here game script should be different for the Rams this week. They play the Cardinals. You would expect them to lead throughout that game. That means more running, successful running, and less volume. So you're not going to expect Kupp to be anywhere close to where he was in terms of overall targets, but he might have 9, which is a great number and why we have him ranked so high. But one of the discrepancies is like, how many snaps a team played in week 1? Will they do that again? Another one is like Baltimore. Why did Isaiah Likely have so many targets? Well, part of it was because Baltimore had to throw the ball so much because they were behind. They were underdogs. That's been a trend for Lamar for the last couple of years. So those are things you have to look at and identify in week 1 so you don't overreact, whether it's on waivers or lineup decisions. So it's kind of like figuring out what's real, what's fake, and we're going to do that again over the next few days leading up to week 2.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk about one more player in there inside the top 5. We got Jamar Chase as well. Jamar Chase, 6 for 62. I do want to read a thing that happened yesterday just so that we can kind of talk about this Bengals wide receiving core. He wasn't a full go in week 1, only ran 28 routes, right? And in part because we didn't see him all preseason. We didn't see him all training camp. Yesterday, though, I was taping the Adam Schefter podcast, and Schefter made a prediction about T. Higgins' availability. I just want to read what he said here. I said that this would be the case with T. Higgins in the offseason on not getting a new deal done and playing it slow with his injuries. It upset a lot of Bengals fans. They got worked up. Well, guess what happens in week 1, Mike? T. Higgins, hamstring, doesn't play. Guess what? They haven't said anything this week. They're going to. They say they're going to wait and see. I'm going to predict to you right now on Tuesday that T. Higgins is not going to play this week either. When Adam Schefter speaks that directly on a Tuesday, I'm at least going to listen to him, and I'm now assuming T. Higgins is not going to suit up. If you don't have T. Higgins for a second straight week, do you have higher expectations for Jamar Chase after what was kind of a dud in week 1 for that Bengals offense?
Yes. First of all, though, when Adam talks about stuff like this, you listen.
Yes.
Because his track record is phenomenal when it comes to this kind of stuff. He knows what he's talking about. We've seen it with Le'Veon Bell the year we all had him ranked number 1 overall, and he was like, I don't know about that with this contract, and he never played. I mean, it was maybe that might be the biggest bust in fantasy football history, really, because of where he was going. He never played. Justin Jefferson, there was a little bit of chatter about that last year. He was the first overall player, and there was contract things, and perhaps his injury lingered a little longer just because he was playing it safe till he gets paid, those kind of things. So definitely, as soon as I heard that, I removed him from our projections. So if you go into the game and you see T. Higgins, there's a 0 next to him because we don't think he's going to play based on that. That's when we adjusted, was after you reported that Adam had said that. So no doubt about it. Higgins, I don't expect him to play. Chase, I do think he will have a better game. You know, I was just talking about trends and game script. In week 1, the Bengals were the game script adjusted pass heaviest team offense in the NFL. That is a trend that you can buy into because they were the pass heaviest offense in the league last year and the year before that. So they throw the ball. It's a part of, it's just a part of the Bengals DNA with Joe Burrow under center, and that can continue. Also, they're playing the Chiefs this week, and they're underdogs, and we expect them to have to throw the ball a ton. That's going to lead to more volume for Joe Burrow, makes him a nice bounce-back candidate in fantasy, and, of course, helps his number 1 receiver, Jamar Chase, who, by the way, after missing a few snaps early on as they got him up to speed, ended up playing 83% of the snaps. So he was on the field a ton, only 6 targets, but he caught them all for 62 yards, was shadowed in that game by Christian Gonzalez, was one of the best young corners in the NFL, so I expect a lot of volume. I don't care. Look, I don't care if it's 15 targets, 6 catches, but it might be 80 yards and a touch. Like, the efficiency doesn't need to be there. The volume will be this week.
Yeah, you can't not start Jamar Chase. And even though this week was a down week for him, 6 for 62, I mean, giving you double-digit fantasy points in week 1. We saw a lot worse performances from stars. We'll talk about a few of those guys a little bit later on in the show. All right. Wide receivers 6 through 11, Mike. The big thing for me here, let's look at this. Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Rashee Rice, and Deebo Samuel. The second name that has climbed a huge amount in our rankings, we were just way too low on Rashee Rice.
Yeah, and by the way, you and I talked about this before the show. Congrats on a good week 1.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great job. You a lot of guys you were on, especially late in the offseason, like, that guy's too low. Nailing it. You took out Isaiah Likely late in best ball. Jaden Reed was your guy all offseason, and you were talking up Rashee Rice down the stretch. Funny enough, Rice and Likely were 2 guys that, like, we kind of moved way up the draft room toward the end when it looked like he wasn't going to be suspended. So hopefully people got some exposure to those guys because talk about a great week 1. So props to you. You absolutely nailed it. And Rice was one of those guys. So, he was a home run. Believe it or not, his average depth of target in this game was lower than last season when he was like dead last at receiver among qualified receivers in that category. But 7 for 103, a 37% target share. The Bengals did a good job slowing receivers in week 1, but it was the Patriots. So the game script for the New England was run heavy. So nothing really to see there. Rice should be fine. He's clearly going to be a feature target. I don't know if Hollywood Brown plays in this game, but if he does, he'll be limited almost certainly because it's a close call. So that's risky. But Rice looks like he is the real deal. I was worried a little bit about him just being a short-range guy as they brought in, like, the perimeter downfield guys, but no way, man. Mahomes loves him, and he looks the part.
Yeah, that after-the-catch ability, too, even if it's like, and you had mentioned, I also have it here on my note. First game, 4.5 air yards per target. That is so low, but he's so dangerous with his legs after the catch. Just thinking about him and Xavier Worthy and the things that both of those wide receivers can do once you put the ball in their hands. Like, obviously, I don't think we're going to see – there was no other player on the Chiefs that had more than 3 targets. That's not going to happen in week 2. I mean, we expect Travis Kelce to get more involved. We expect some of those other wide receivers to be involved, but that's not going to take away from what Rashee Rice brings to this. So obviously have him inside the top 10 this week. It's going to be tough to be able to pull him out from that spot. All right, let's move ahead and talk wide receivers 11 through 15. Mike Clay. This one is going to be interesting. Mike Evans, Nico Collins, Drake London, Devontae Adams, and Chris Godwin. I got to tell you, the big thing about the Falcons offense, it felt like they had concepts of a plan for Drake London in week 1, Mike.
I don't get it.
Just didn't come together for him. I mean, even the coaching staff said afterwards, like, we regret not being able to get him the ball more often than what we.
Oh, we've heard that before, haven't we?
We sure have. I just hope that it's different with this coaching staff. But we've still got him ranked inside our top 15 at the position. I do expect a bounce back from Drake London this week. I'm not going to overreact to week 1.
Yeah, remember, they were playing the Steelers. Okay, one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Shadow.
I'm talking about the offense altogether.
Okay.
If a quarterback has a bad day, like against the Steelers, normally it's like, okay, that he had a down game, right? So again, this is week 1. Like,
Yep.
Kirk Cousins just happened to have to play the Steelers. He had a down game. It's his first game back. New offense, new scheme, everything. It's okay. They're going to be. I think that offense will be fine. As for London, you said it. He was shadowed by Joey Porter Jr. as expected, one of the best corners in the NFL. He had 4 targets, 2 catches, 15 yards, but he played 100% of the snaps, and that was perhaps my biggest takeaway in this game. I was tweeting about it in the first half. Kyle Pitts had, there was a point like in the second quarter where I looked and it was Pitts had played every snap. London had played every snap. Bajan, I think at that point, had still played every snap as well. Algier only played like 6 snaps in the game.
Yeah.
So they are featuring their talent now. London is going to have better matchups going forward, and that starts this week. They play Philly on Monday Night Football. Darius Slay did not shadow in week 1. I'm not sure he will this week either. If he does, it'll be London, but the Eagles obviously struggled a bit against that Packers passing game in the opener. So I think this is the week. I think London gets back on track. Should be a better matchup. Breakout week for the season could very well come this week.
I'm quite a bit lower than you are on Devontae Adams. I just want to say that. I've got him at wide receiver 20, Mike, and you have him, I believe, at wide receiver 13, consensus at wide receiver 14. I do have some fear about that Raiders offense, and I don't want to have it be an overreaction to week 1, but just looking at what that offense looked like in general. With Gardner Minshew, the quarterback that we talked about all offseason, like, hey, if one of these guys we know can go out there and support a bunch of pass catchers, we've seen Gardner Minshew do it. Didn't give me all the warm fuzzies that I was hoping for. Like, do you have more excitement for Devontae Adams just staying true with a superstar wide receiver?
Yeah, I think he'll get his. He's going to get that big target share. And we did see Gardner Minshew feed his top target, Michael Pittman Jr. I'm going to do that all year.
Michael Pittman Jr., Marvin Harrison.
I'm going to do that all year. I'm going to call him the opposite. He fed Pittman, who had one of the biggest target shares and highest fantasy floors throughout last season. So I think better days ahead for Adams. And he did a good job getting the ball to Brock Bowers. He had one of the top, it's a low bar, but he had one of the best tight end fantasy weeks of week 1. So, I'm still... Again, I'm not going to overreact to that. I believe in Adams' abilities and the fact that he's going to get that huge target share, so I'm leaving him go.
I still have him as a top 20 wide receiver, but I've just lowered some expectations.
Yeah, we're still starting him.
Hopefully that we can see a little bit more out of that Raiders offense. All right, wide receivers 16 through 20. We're just moving along here. 16, Marvin Harrison Jr., 17, Jalen Waddle, 18, Michael Pittman Jr., 19, Stephon Diggs, and 20, Devontae Smith. Big one here for me, Mike. Marvin Harrison Jr., after a brutal week 1, 3 targets, 1 reception, 4 yards. He had as many receiving yards as there were as the picks that he was in the actual NFL draft. Number 4 overall pick. That's not what you want.
No, inexcusable. He was not shadowed in this game. I'm sure they were certainly leaning coverage towards Marvin Harrison, but it's unacceptable for him to only have seen 3 targets in that game. The good news is he was a full-time player. He played 90% of the snaps, so there's no need to panic. You don't take a guy 4th overall to be a decoy, right? He's the real deal by all means, and they're going to figure this out. So big mistake in this game, especially one where they left the Bills come back in it, and then they had to throw the ball. You got to get the ball to him. They're going to fix that mistake. So this week they draw the Rams. Not super intimidated by that secondary. Tre'Davious White's there. Maybe he shadows. He did on and off a little bit this past week, but Darius Williams is on IR. So this is a defense that can be had. I expect Harrison to get it going this week.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it. He ran more routes and had more snaps than any other Cardinals player inside.
Yeah, he's the one. He's the clear one. He just had a dud in the opener. Yep.
Yeah, which always gives it this. He is like the classic. Do not overreact to week 1 because in spite of oh man, I can't believe I took this guy inside the top 15 at wide receiver, and this is what he gives me. I've been saying this, and it was one of the things I said on SportsCenter on Tuesday. If for some reason you have a panicked fantasy manager around any of these guys, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr., a couple other guys we're going to talk about. Go ahead and throw some trade offers out there.
Yeah, you need a tight end. Go after a tight end right now with
There's
everyone
a handful you could
worried about them. Oh, absolutely, you gotta. This is your chance because Harrison is a big week in week 2. It's over.
It is.
His value will never be lower.
Yeah. All right, let's look just one more outside of that. We got a handful of people, wide receivers 21 through 25, and this is another one that's really interesting to me. Chris Olave at 21, Zay Flowers 22, DK Metcalf 23, Brandon Ayuk 24, and DJ Moore at wide receiver 25. Chris Olave's tough. I was talking with Kevin Nagande about this yesterday. He's got him on one of his fantasy rosters. I've got him in a few places too, and he was just that guy that when you clicked draft next to his name, it didn't feel exciting. Not because Chris Olave isn't a really good wide receiver, but that offense just didn't inspire a lot of confidence. And then in week 1, it's like you're watching the Saints score just go up and up and up, and it's everyone other than Chris Olave.
Yeah, even Alvin Kamara wouldn't score till late in that game as well, too.
Crazy.
Just unreal. This is partially a game script issue. They were way ahead. Only 25 pass plays while Derek Carr was on the field yesterday. The good news for Olave is he was on the field for 23 of those plays. So he's still clearly the number one feature target. 2 targets in this game. Believe it or not, Daniel, that's a career low. He has never had fewer than 3 targets in a game. Last year, he averaged 8.8 per game. So I know it's a new scheme here, but the Saints also don't like crush teams like that generally.
Oh, they don't.
He's going to be okay. It's Chris Olave. He's a superstar target. They built their passing game around him in the offseason. It's very much like Harrison. It just didn't work out in this opener, and part of it was because they didn't have to throw the ball in the second half. It was just that simple. They just ran the clock out. So better days ahead for Olave. Again, he's a guy that if you can pounce on, you go ahead and do it. They play Dallas this week. I don't expect Diggs to shadow him in this game, and they're shorthanded with Deron Bland out. So this is going to set up for Olave to move around the field and get open in a game where the script will be different. They'll probably be trailing in this game, or it'll be close. They're going to have to throw. Good news for Olave's fantasy prospect.
Yeah. I don't expect to have Rashid Shaheed or Juwan Johnson or Foster Moreau to lead this team in targets or receptions or receiving yards at the end of the year. This is just another one of those week 1s where, as much as I said it's not exciting to draft him or it didn't feel exciting to draft him, he's another guy that I'm very much putting in trade offers for, especially because of how that offense looked. You could see some panicked fantasy managers there. All right.
No doubt.
One last quick conversation. We'll be quick on this. How are you approaching Packers wide receivers?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just,
This week with Malik Willis, it's tough.
I am really worried about this. A couple numbers here on Malik Willis. 3 full games in his career. He has 67 career pass attempts. He has 0 passing touchdowns in his career. He has never thrown for 100 yards in a game. His career per play averages 5.2 yards per attempt, 52% completion percentage. The Packers, here's the thing. The Packers were so discouraged by their backup quarterback situation with Sean Clifford that they were like, we have to do something. And they traded for Malik Willis, a late pick for Malik Willis. That's desperation. I mean, we know that he hasn't been very good. There's a reason the Titans moved on. It's bad. I mean, this is a really bad situation. They have to hope that LaFleur can coach him up and get something out of him, but I expect them to hand the ball off as much as they possibly can for the next few weeks till Love is back. And again, I can't really stress that enough. They just got Willis, too, on top of everything else. They just acquired him. There's no way he has a full grasp of this playbook on top of everything else. This is a major problem. I'm really scared of all the skill guys. I'm not going to start any. The only one I would consider is Reed because he runs, too.
Yes.
So if they're going to be like, we're going to run the ball as much as possible, Reed, you would think, could be like Debo and maybe get 4 or 5 carries. Maybe that bails him out with a few targets, but massive concerns for this passing game over the next month.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Really tough. After what was a really great start to week 1, even though Christian Watson didn't have as many fantasy points as we wanted, still had 3 end zone targets, which you're thrilled with in week 1.
Yeah, only 8 players in the league had more than 1 end zone target. He had 3 to lead the NFL in week 1. But again, his playing time declined as the game went on, and there was more Dontavian Wicks mixed in for him. Reed was in the slot. Dobbs was the clear 1 in terms of snaps, and then Watson was losing some work to Wicks. So definitely worried about that a little bit with Watson. But again, I don't want to touch these guys this week. I have him 45th, not really a starter. Reed, I have at 38 because the rushing helps him a little bit, but that might be too optimistic. I'm really scared of this situation.
Yikes. Well, if you've got Reed at 38, I've got Jayden Reed all the way up at 30 this week because I'm still just trusting my guy. But I understand all the trepidation that you feel, and it's
just got to hope for carries. I'm worried that it's going to be like 92 passing yards for the Packers.
Don't love that. All right, let's talk about some week 2 running back rankings now, Mike. And this is where I feel like if you had drafted Saquon Barkley, it's a little James Earl Jones.
I did.
If you draft him, it will come. I'm talking about fantasy championships right there. We got Bijan Robinson at 1, CMC at 2 if he plays. We'll talk about that. Breece Hall at 3, Saquon Barkley at 4, Jonathan Taylor at 5. Mike, I don't think we saw anyone outside of Saquon Barkley crush it as much as he did. There were a handful of guys that had more touches, a handful of guys that had more opportunities and more rushing yards, but Saquon just looked like he grabbed that backfield and has the full control of it. Kenny Gainwell, The only other running back to touch the ball had 1 carry. This is in no way, shape, or form is anyone else really a part of this backfield. It's just Saquon Barkley, and then figuring out how much Jalen Hurts is going to siphon away potential goal line carries, which didn't happen a whole lot in week 1.
Yeah, 5 players had at least 2 carries inside the opponent's 5-yard line in week 1. Saquon Barkley was one of those players. And we'll talk about the guy who actually led in that category a little bit later. Was not a running back, actually.
Yeah, it was not.
Foreshadowing. Yeah, I mean, that was the concern. Would he get goal line carries with Hurts? And by the way, the brotherly shove didn't look great. You know, they made it work, I think, once, but it looked a little underwhelming. That perhaps is good news for Barkley. Get more opportunities near the goal line.
They talked about that a little bit too with the center, right? Some of the botched snaps and all that stuff. Like, I'm interested and hopeful that doesn't continue, but that didn't look good for Jalen.
I don't think the hit rate's going to be as strong as it was last year, but Hurts is still a big part of that, right? He's super strong. He's going to make that play work quite a bit. The one thing I would say, if there's a knock here, is will Barkley get enough targets to bail him out when he does not have the big rushing day? Only 7% target share. He was on the field for 28 of 39 passing plays, so that's good. But Hurts, as we know, with scrambling quarterbacks, not always going to dump it off as often as others. So want to see an uptick in the target share. I projected it about double what it was last week, which is where I expected it to be going into the season. But that's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Taking on Atlanta this week, I have I have Saquon Barkley as running back 3. I think I'm highest on him across the board. Although, all these top few guys, you could pick any one of these guys in the top 5 to finish as RB1. How'd you feel about the CMC inactive? You weren't here to be able to talk about it on the show yesterday.
I was shocked. I was as shocked as anyone. By all accounts, he was going to play in that game. He had suggested as much. The team gave us no indication he was not going to play. Sounds like Jordan Mason got kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge Friday that he was going to play or he was going to start that game, which is definitely frustrating. It's frustrating. I feel like we should have had more of an indication. I know he's questionable on the report, but it was not there was really no indication that he was not going to go. So I went into the week fully confident that he'd be out there in week 1, and that was a mistake. You just got to protect yourself for the Monday night games, especially in week 1. So hopefully many of you could pick up Jordan Mason and start him.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. But yeah, didn't love it. That was disappointing.
That was one of those things that, like, coming into the week, I said this to my buddy Kurt, like, coming into the week, I had CMC in a number of spots where I was lucky enough to get the number 1 overall pick. But I didn't move him to my flex spot because I didn't want to start 3 running backs in the week. We always talk about putting your Monday Night Football guys in the flex, which makes a ton of sense. But when you're not starting 3 running backs, you kind of leave yourself a little bit vulnerable at the running back spot because once CMC is out on Monday night, unless you had Jordan Mason, there was literally nowhere to pivot. A number of fantasy managers, unfortunately, very frustrated with that. It was one of these things. I didn't say it yesterday with Field or Stefania, and it just felt like a fan. I'm just putting on my fan hat. Like there was like that. Once Jordan Mason had said that, it felt like some sort of injury or roster manipulation by the 49ers with that. And you never know how it works out. But when Jordan Mason is like, well, yeah, I knew since Friday that I was potentially going to play a lot. It's like it just hurts as fantasy managers. I know they don't care about us in fantasy, but that's how it felt watching the game as a fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. We're just trying to set our lineups out here, and we didn't know,
Nope.
So it's definitely annoying.
Very annoying.
Annoying at best. I had the same thing. I got burned. I have him in a couple leagues. I got burned in both of them. One of them, my bench was completely done, so I had no flexibility. It was drop CMC or nothing.
Yep.
And then no IR in that league, and then another one was the same thing. I just had no one to drop, so I was just out of luck. So
I had
is what it is.
I had a Survivor league that I'm in with a bunch of people here, and I was in last place, but going into it with CMC still left to play.
Fine.
So I was like,
So
yeah,
you're
no,
out.
don't worry about it. And now I'm out of that, so that one did not work. All right, let's talk about running backs 6 through 10 for week 2. Kyron Williams at 6, Devon Achane at 7, Alvin Kamara at 8, Isaiah Pacheco at 9, and Jahmyr Gibbs at 10.
Iron, let's go, baby.
Yeah, Kyron Williams, you've got him inside the top 5, actually, even though we've got him at 6.
Yeah, I need to. We need to check the most drop players of week 1 because I had that.
The Blake Corum call.
Yeah, we did a couple of months ago. We did projections for like post week 1 headlines or something, and mine was Blake Corum will be the most drop player in fantasy after he's outsnapped like 54-6 by Kyron Williams.
You
and
weren't
he played
that far
0
off.
snaps.
Yeah.
I was actually too optimistic. I wasn't far off. So I gotta be honest. We have fun. Like you like to be right. And you make fun of yourself when you're wrong. There's a mix of plenty of that in week 1. But that was a fun one to enjoy.
Being able to get
all the backpedaling. People were really angry about that. But even the people that were anti-Kyron were like, still taking victory laps because his efficiency was low or something.
No, I mean, against that Lions defense, it
dude,
doesn't
he
count.
played 90% of the snaps. Like, come on, and it was a tough matchup. We knew that going in. We talked about it last week. It was not a surprise. But look, you still want to give up on Kyron? Go for it. He played. He clearly was their feature back. Unbelievable usage, more than even I expected in that one. I thought we'd see at least a little Blake Coleman. At some point, we will.
Yes,
but it's clearly the Kyron Williams show.
Well, he had over 20 touches in that game, right? You're talking about a guy. If you're telling me that I can have a starting running back get over 20 touches in an offense that's supposed to be able to score as much as we expect the Rams to be able to do, you're going to take that every day of the week. So, like, 100%. Don't let the inefficiency of Week 1 against a stout Lions run defense.
That felt like a big win. As someone who drafted a ton of Kyron, I know, again, it was a slow start in terms of the fantasy point total because of the matchup. But I feel great going forward about his standing in that offense.
Let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco here. 15 carries and 2 receptions, 78 total yards and a touchdown. Carson Steele, the only running backs in this backfield. Carson Steele had 2 carries. Samaje Perine had 1 reception. Only other running backs to touch the ball. This is very clearly the Isaiah Pacheco show in Kansas City.
Yep, 80% snap share, 15 carries, 3 targets. Efficiency wasn't great, but he looks the part. He just looks awesome out there, so I'm not worried about that. He'll be busy in this game against the Bengals. And I think Perine, in time, his role will expand as they get him up to speed with the offense. He'll have more of a passing game role, but Pacheco.
Jerick McKinnon role from the past?
Maybe not to that extent because Pacheco was successful as a pass catcher late last season. So I'm pumped for Pacheco, and I'm not sure there's a more fun running back to watch at this point. The way how aggressive he is, it's unbelievable. I love him.
I think Chiefs fans might say Carson Steele is technically more fun to watch because they both run angry. I mean, they're just like they know how to have angry runners there in Kansas City, which is nice. But yeah, Isaiah Pacheco, someone that I'm at least still buying in on for Week 2, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, running backs 11 through 15. 11 is Derrick Henry. 12, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon at 12 after what was a huge Week 1. 13, Ken Walker. 14, James Conner. 15, James Cook. Mike, I mean, I kind of led into this. Joe Mixon, 30 carries, 3 receptions, 178 total yards. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry, which seems hard to do when you carry the ball 30 times in one game. I mean, he was uber efficient and still was able to crush it week in and week out. There's no one else in that backfield. Dameon Pierce only had 3 touches. This is absolutely, just like I said with Isaiah Pacheco, this backfield is the Joe Mixon show.
Yeah, Dare Ogunbowale played a lot in this game too. And if you remember last year, I say a lot. He was ahead of Dameon Pierce, and there was, again, for some reason this offseason there was Pierce hype. Like, he was just hurt last year. He's gonna bounce back. He's gonna be in a timeshare with Joe Mixon. He was third in line. Ogunbowale was ahead of him again, just like he was most of last season. So not worried about Pierce at all. The one thing I will say, first of all, Mixon, great. Clearly the lead ball carrier for a good offense. That's why we held on hope that he could put up another big season. So excellent from that perspective. He played 71% of the snaps in this game. One of 5 players with 2+ carries inside the 5-yard line. Same status, Saquon Barkley. Mixon also on that list. All good. The one thing I'll say is very much like Barkley as well. He was on the field for 21 pass plays. Pierce and Dare combined for 17. So he was playing about half of the passing snaps. Maybe limits his output in that department, but that's not going to matter if he remains the lead back for this offense. I did talk, though, about stats to keep an eye on, though, in terms of overall volume. One of them is the fact that Houston ran 76 offensive snaps in Week 1. That was the most in the entire NFL, and I'll talk about the team on the other side here shortly. But that's why he had 30 carries. That's really going to boost that volume. They're usually going to be around 64. That's the league average. So just something to keep in mind. Abnormal week for them in terms of snaps, so don't get too carried away with that. However, Mixon week to week, as long as he's healthy, going to be a fringe RB1.
Do you have him, and I think this is part of the reason I want to ask you, I have him outside my top 10, top 12, in part because even though he looked fantastic in Week 1, taking on the Chicago Bears defense, trying to figure out how real this Chicago Bears defense is, which after what was a really good Week 1 for that D, because the offense didn't really do anything for that team.
Yeah, they were kind of mid-pack against running backs in that game with Chicago. Running backs were kind of middle of the pack, so not super worried about the matchup. But look, Mixon, 5 years running now, has not been super efficient as a rusher, so expecting 5 yards per carry is not something you can necessarily count on, and you're probably looking more at 15 carries a game, not 30. So yeah. It was kind of an abnormal game for Mixon. But again, he's going to be what he is. He's going to be a 15-carry, 3-target guy, and one of the best offenses most likely in the NFL. and could push for 10 touchdowns. So there's a lot to like out of the gate. Just don't expect that. I don't think he's an elite top 5 running back, but he is a top 15 running back.
Yeah, well, if this is one of those situations I feel like he could be, and I wish I'd thought about this more, but like he feels like he could be one of the better values at the running back position as if you waited at the running back spot, given that I could see the Texans, if we think they're going to do what they do, they get ahead in games, they're able to have someone that's going to like help grind the game out at the end of the game. That would be Joe Mixon in this role, right? It's not going to be anyone else in this backfield. So we'll see how that works out, especially this week against the Chicago Bears. Running backs 16 through 20 for week 2. Starting off with Josh Jacobs, then Ramondre Stevenson after a really nice week 1, Travis Etienne, Rachaad White at 19, and Brian Robinson.
A lot of interesting names there too, with some of the young backs looking good for Jacksonville there, with Bigsby looked pretty good, Bucky Irving looked good for Tampa. Jacobs interesting. He's fascinating now. Is he going to get 30 carries, or is he going to be a joke, or is it going to be a disaster because this offense is a joke with Willis back there? It's hard to say, but I think their game plan is going to be like, Josh, get ready. We're going to try every play to get you the ball. So
as much as humanly possible. Ramondre Stevenson, let's talk about him real quick.
He was
25 carries, 3 receptions, 126 total yards and a touchdown. 3.2 yards after first contact. That was third most, behind only J.K. Dobbins, who broke 2 long 60-yarders, which was a big part of that stat for him, and Tank Bigsby. 4th in rushing yards, 5th in yards from scrimmage. It felt like, for me, Ramondre Stevenson was this offense in New England. The question is, what's it going to look like here in week 2?
Yeah, so parts game script. They were up surprisingly on
against the Bengals, right?
By quite a few points. They're up basically by 2 touchdowns most of that game. So they were just, let's run, we Brissett a quarterback, let's just run the ball, run the clock out, so that helped. Also, Antonio Gibson was questionable coming in, so he was very clearly limited. 80% snap share for Ramondre. He's not going to see that most weeks. So I would say maybe 65. It could even be 60, 40 with Antonio Gibson. So he'll take a little bit of a step back, but a good sign that he was able to rack up 28 opportunities and touches in this game. Didn't do much in the passing game, but again, they didn't have to throw it very much. Seattle really good against Denver's running backs in week 1, so maybe a little bit of a tougher matchup, but Ramondre looked the part. And you know what's fun about him is I felt like, and we talked about this in the offseason, he was like the last running back before the cliff
cutoff, yeah,
right, where then you start to get like, I don't know, I don't feel as good. It's like Zamir White's next, like I don't know, and like that didn't go great in week 1. So for him to be that guy right at that cliff and then to do what he did in week 1, it feels like, okay, I feel some validation after a dud last year kind of with him with the injuries, that he bounced back. He belonged in that tier of reliable RB2s, and that's what he is moving forward.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about Rachaad White, because Rachaad White this week taking on the same Detroit Lions defense that Kyren Williams saw last week. The one stat that stood out to me was there was one running back that had a negative yards before first contact in the NFL after week 1 amongst qualified runners, and that was Rachaad White. So he did so much of his damage out of the backfield as a pass catcher. I'm worried to see what he's going to be, which is part of why we have him all the way down at running back 20, in spite of, he did pretty well in week 1 when you look at his yardage totals.
Yeah, big volume. I don't have the snap share rate in front of me now, but I know he played a lot. He got a bulk of the work in the backfield. Bucky Irving looked good, and Todd Bowles had made a comment just before the season that said, well, White's our main guy to start the season, but we'll go with the hot hand. And that's a little concerning. I mean, we saw that happen with Jacksonville. Bigsby got hot. Etienne had a fumble, and Bigsby kind of took control there late. So those kind of things are things to watch. But I think for the near future, it's still the White show. He had a ton of work in the passing game, to your point, which isn't going to go away.
No.
And also, I guess game script kind of benefited them with being ahead of Washington in that game. But I feel confident with him right now as an RB2, but just has to be efficient and hold down that job.
Yeah, lowered expectations for this week taking on that defense. 69%.
Yeah, no doubt about that, yeah.
69% of plays on the field. So that was
so there you go. Yeah, that's good. As long as that keeps up, we're not worried.
All right, one more set of running back tiers we're going to look at, 21 through 15. Mike, there are some good names in here too. Jerome Ford, 22, J.K. Dobbins, 23, David Montgomery, 24, Aaron Jones, who had a really nice week 1 in spite of all of us being nervous about him, and 25, Najee Harris. I can't believe the disrespect for my man David Montgomery after he pulled out that win for the Lions.
Well, you got Jahmyr Gibbs up at around RB7.
Yeah, it's tough to have both of them.
We'll have to talk about Jones later this week. He's kind of fascinating for me because I was like, man, he came in the projections very low after a pretty good week 1, and I kind of dug into that a little bit. So we'll get into why he's not ranked like 15th throughout the week. But I saw Fields a little bit higher on him, so we'll get into that. But the headliner here, no doubt about it. Another one of the risers in week 1. Loved what we saw from our guy, J.K. Dobbins, another guy who you had drafted in like every one of our mock drafts
player in our mock draft exercise.
Yeah.
Yep. In part, and I said this yesterday, in part because I was able to grab him in the 11th and 12th round a lot of times.
Yeah, I have him a lot too. I'm with you.
Right? Yeah. So the big concern for me, and I don't want to say it's a concern, but like in watching what he did, he obviously had way more juice than Gus Edwards. Like there was no question about it. Only 10 carries, 135 yards. He did have 3 catches, only 4 yards on those 3 catches, but you love seeing him get involved in the passing game because you know Gus Edwards is going to be non-existent in the passing game. Love the touchdown, but he had 2 60-plus yard runs and 1 7-yard touchdown run. None of his other 7 carries went for more than 3 yards. So I was a little bit worried and nervous about the idea that like the inefficiency of the rest of that offense, he really had that volume or had that production because of 2 big plays. But sometimes that's all you need in fantasy, Mike Clay. I mean, we're talking about a guy we have just inside the top 25, and if that's what Dobbins can deliver and start getting more of that inside of this Chargers offense, a guy that's going to keep climbing up my ranks.
Yeah, there's a few reasons I'm optimistic here. One is I thought for sure with him coming off the major injury, with them saying Gus Edwards is the one, that it was going to be a slow start for Dobbins. Like it would be like maybe 70-30, 60-40. Gus would be the guy, and they were leading in this game, so they easily could have just leaned into to Gus Edwards to run the clock out, and they did not do that. J.K. Dobbins in this game paced the backfield in snaps. He played 59% of the snaps, also ran 12 routes, had the 3 targets, as you mentioned. Edwards, 11 carries, 1 target on just 5 routes, and only played 22 snaps, or 41%. Also, it was just 2 guys. Vidal was inactive in this game. So Hassan Haskins, who's a special teamer, was the 3. It was just these 2 guys, and Dobbins was the main guy. You talk about the efficiency, maybe a little boom bust in terms of big plays, but he got the big plays. And also, this is his career. The guy averages over 5 yards per carry. This is why we love him so much and why the Chargers took a shot and why we keep taking flyers on him in fantasy, because he is such a skilled football player. And also, talk about a great situation for week 2 against Carolina, who got crushed on the ground in week 1. Yep. I thought Carolina would be a little better this year. I was maybe a little higher than the consensus on them. Ugly week 1 start. That was atrocious, and they got to figure it out soon. I mean, there's just no reason to be that poor, and I think they'll be better, but that was gross.
I was flirting with the idea because I have 2 of these. I have both J.K. Dobbins and Rachaad White in a league, and I've been flirting with the idea of knowing Rachaad White, the inefficiency that he had in some of his running game abilities, the opponent that he has here in week 2, and knowing that J.K. Dobbins gets that Panthers defense now, unfortunately, without Derek Brown, sounds like for the rest of the season. It's a great matchup after what was everything that you could potentially want to see in week 1 for him to come out. I'm flirting with the idea of potentially flip-flopping those 2 guys in my ranks and having J.K. Dobbins closer to inside my top 20.
I can't blame you. And you mentioned Derek Brown. I mean, that guy is a superstar. He was one of the good things about that Panthers roster. Yeah. And he played most of that game. I think he played 90% of the snaps for the Panthers before that injury. And again, with him out there for almost every play, they allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs in week 1. This sets up great for Dobbins in week 2.
If you draft him, it will come. That's how I felt about J.K. Dobbins, being able to talk about fantasy.
Just going to keep making that same joke.
Yeah, over and over and over again. You know what? Can I just want to ask you, Mike? I loved this man. Like, I absolutely loved James Earl Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, everyone's going to say, like, Star Wars was so easy, but, like, do you have a favorite James Earl Jones role?
He was, that was Sandlot, right?
He was, yeah. I don't know what his name was in the Sandlot. He was the old man. The old man in Sandlot.
He was friends with Babe Ruth.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, the dog, yeah.
I just watched Field of Dreams last night because I wanted to, like, relive a little bit there. So, like, seeing him as Terrence Mann in that was really cool. He was in Conan the Barbarian as well.
Absolutely.
In that one. Yeah. And Mufasa in The Lion King.
Oh, right. That's a good call.
He was incredible. He did so many amazing things that I just shout out, and what an awesome life. Awesome life for that guy. So rest in peace, James Earl Jones. We love you, buddy. All right, let's talk about some quarterbacks. Quarterbacks here for week 2, Mike Clay. Top of our quarterback rankings. It is all over the board with who we have at the number 1 spot. We got Josh Allen technically as consensus number 1, in spite of the fact neither you or I have him there. Jalen Hurts at number 2, Lamar Jackson at 3, Patrick Mahomes at 4, and Anthony Richardson at 5. I'll say this. Those top 4 quarterbacks in one way, shape, or form are top 4 for all of us across the board. When I look at this, though, Anthony Richardson, quarterback number 5, after what he did in week 1. Mike, we didn't get to talk about it, but that throw that he made, that 66-yard throw to Alec Pierce was just unbelievable.
Yeah, this is tricky. It almost feels like if he keeps playing this way, it's going to be like a boom-bust receiver like Deshaun Jackson, Jameson Williams, how we talk about those guys, because well, first of all, I mentioned before, Houston ran the most offensive snaps in week 1, while the team on the other side of that game, not coincidentally, was the Colts, who ran the fewest offensive plays in week number 1. So better days ahead for them in terms of overall volume for their offense, but he only had 12 pass attempts in this game. 19 pass attempts in this game. He completed 9 of those 19, which is bad.
Not good.
But he had 212 yards on those plays. His average depth of throw was 16.6. To give you perspective on how absurdly high that is, the next closest quarterback was 11.8. So it was basically like, I'm either running with it, which he did plenty, 6 for 56 and a touchdown, or throwing it way down the field.
That sounds like me playing Madden, Mike. It's you scramble with your
God,
quarterback,
me
or you
too.
just toss it deep.
That's all I
every
do.
play.
So many interceptions in Madden. So bad at it. But that's not something that's going to work every week. Like he's gonna turn. He had an interception this game. He's going to throw a lot of interceptions. There's going to be just games where he does not connect on those throws, and that concerns me a little bit. But again, he's not usually only going to throw 19 passes. It's a very low volume game. He had 2 passing touchdowns in this game. All of last season, he had 3 passing touchdowns in what was essentially 3 full games. So. Good start from a fantasy perspective. Hit some big plays, run the ball a lot, as he did in this game. And it'll be fine. They play the Packers this week, so we'll see what that looks like.
I realize that it's probably easy just to make this comparison. It's more of like an eye comparison than looking at the stats. And you can tell me I'm way off here as the numbers guy, Mike. But like what you described of huge arm, gonna air it out, or I'm gonna run the football, that feels like Josh Allen to me when you describe that, right? And Josh Allen, and you know that we got into this last year. Like Josh Allen had a ton of turnovers.
Yeah, he did.
You know, a bunch of turnovers. Led the quarterback position, I believe, or was second in interceptions, and yet still was QB1 on the season. So even if you have that, as long as you can find those other plays, as long as you can connect every once in a while on those deep shots and do the things that he does with his legs, which we know that having legs like that is a cheat code in fantasy football. Like he can continue to sustain this volume.
I think he'll be fine because, he hit Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce had a big week 1. That's not he's going to be the case. But he's going to get Josh Downs back soon, and Michael Pittman's going to have bigger days ahead as well. They like Colin Granson at tight end, so he'll be okay. I'm still very confident he's going to be a top 5 scorer at quarterback.
Do you think that there's anything for his opponent, obviously taking on Green Bay this week? I don't have high expectations for the Green Bay offense. We talked about that with Malik Willis under center. Like I could see the Colts getting up and then turning into more of like a run-focused team.
Yeah, he'll be part of that though. He'll be part of that running game. I know. Again, he only had 6 carries in that game, but he was effective on those plays, and they didn't run that many snaps. So, not super worried about that. The Packers did not let Jalen Hurts run a lot in the opener.
Oh, he had 13 carries for like 33 yards.
Not early on, but then he got loose. He eventually ended up getting going. So again, it's just not anything I'm too concerned about.
Okay. All right. Let's look at quarterbacks 6 through 10. Jayden Daniels already inside our top 7 at the quarterback spot. He checks in as QB6, Kyler Murray at QB7, CJ Stroud at 8, Justin Fields at quarterback 9, and then Brock Purdy at QB 10. How can we not talk about Jayden Daniels and everything?
Running quarterbacks, man. Yeah.
Dude, I mean, you talked about guys having carries inside the 5. Was he one of those quarterbacks that had a bunch of carries inside the 5?
Yeah, so he was the guy. He led the NFL in carries inside the 5 with 3 in week number 1. And it paid off in a big way for him. 16 carries, 88 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Of those 16 carries, which enormous number, 9 were designed runs. 9 were, so 7 were scrambles. So they were finding ways to utilize him in this game, and it paid off big from a fantasy standpoint. I said this a few weeks ago. He's going to be the guy that I regret not drafting more because he was just so cheap. He was what everyone was on, Anthony Richardson, and what they want him to be. And you can get Daniels so much later, and he might perform just as at the same level from a fantasy standpoint. So luckily, I do have plenty of exposure to him. I wish I had more, but he's looking good. He's looking good.
Taking on the Giants this week. Giants are one of the defenses that you want to start as many players as you can against them. Unfortunately, after what was a rough week 1 for the Giants, feels like the Commanders are in a good spot. Hopefully for this one.
Yeah, and again, the thing is, it's like, all right, he might have to throw as much if they're ahead in this game, which again, it might be close. They're not very good either, but he's going to run. He's going to be a big part of that running game, and I'm not worried. Like, he's set up for a huge week. I actually have him QB5, so he's just inside my top 5.
All right, Mike Clay, we have a little bit of breaking news coming into the show. Per our guy, Marcel Lewis-Jacques, we got Dolphins running back Raheem Mostert is out for Thursday's game versus the Bills. Per Mike McDonald, Devon Achane will be a game-time decision. I went on SportsCenter yesterday and talked about how my number 2 running back. Well,
keep name-dropping anchors.
I'm just saying, you can bring it up whenever you want to, but I was very excited about this. I talked about Jaylen Wright needs to be a guy that you add, especially with it being a short week. I have no idea how much run he's going to get in this game because they're still going to have Jeff Wilson Jr. that I think is going to get a number of totes. But they drafted this kid. They want to see what he's like. I think he's at least worth a bench stash, knowing that both Mostert and Achane have been dealing with injuries, not just last year, but already the start of the season. It's only week 2.
Yeah, you guys spent the offseason making fun of me for CMC, talking about his age. Okay, you made fun of me for talking about Raheem Mostert and his age. He's already out one game. Made fun of me for talking about Devon Achane being 190 pounds.
That's true.
Not going to be able to hold up, even though he'd be an explosive player.
Yeah, but Tyler's
already
Nana told us we had to draft him. So.
I'm just saying. Now that goes both ways. I was in on Puka big. That one's hurting me. That one's hurting me for sure. But anyway, yeah. So that's the thing. I see everyone talking about Jaylen Wright. He was a healthy scratch this past week, and Jeff Wilson Jr. got some run in that game, including throughout the game. It wasn't just like at the tail end. So Wilson. Let's say they're both out. Let's say Mostert's out and then Achane can't go. They're both out.
Okay.
It should not be shocking if Jeff Wilson leads that backfield.
Yes.
Again, he was up over Jaylen Wright last week, so there could have been some special teams implications there, but just be careful with that. I don't think you say, okay, Wright's RB 15. Wilson's probably ranked ahead of him. They're probably both flex options. So just be careful with that. I'm just surprised everyone's going right to Jaylen Wright, who was clearly 4th on the depth chart in week number 1, but he should at least be on every roster because if he comes out, he has more size than those other guys. He's super fast. I loved him as a prospect, so would not shock me if he just is awesome and then he kind of forces his way into a larger role. But again, tread lightly because Jeff Wilson is there too.
I'm not making this direct comparison, even though it's going to sound like I'm making it. But like everything you just described was Devon Achane last year. I mean, he was a healthy scratch in week 1. Came out and they were like, boy, we can't keep this kid off the field with everything that he's showing us. So like potentially, that's why he's at least worth grabbing, putting on benches because he could develop into something based on what this running back room could offer.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't think Achane's career is going to go this way. And there's a lot of other things like off the field, behind the scenes, that make this a tough comparison to make, but just bear with me for a second.
Yeah.
Achane so far is showing some signs of like Kadarius Toney, like where when he's out there and he's healthy, he can light it up. Remember some of the games he had with the Giants and even the plays he made with the Chiefs?
Yep.
Achane's been better overall so far to some extent, but he's only had 4 career big games. He's had, he really finished slowly last year. Second half of the season, he had one game over 13 points. Looked good in week 1, but the volume there was limited. He was actually atrocious as a rusher in week 1. It was all passing game work. But the injuries are piling up. This is his 4th injury now?
Yeah.
In one season and one game. So that makes me nervous. Is this guy going to be able to hold up? He has told us the answer is no so far, and he is undersized, and that was a knock on him coming into the league. He would always be a situational back because of his size and his durability, and that's what we're seeing so far. And that was why I didn't have him ranked as high as most people coming into the season. And by the way, I might regret saying that. Maybe he plays this week and he's great and he holds up the whole season, but that remains a concern for me.
So Devon Achane right now for us is running back 6, taking on the Buffalo Bills. I don't think there's any way that he can climb higher in the rankings than that, even with Mostert out. It would just be Jeff Wilson kind of taking in that. Jeff Wilson and potentially Jaylen Wright taking in some of those auxiliary roles that Raheem Mostert would leave on the table.
And for the record, just on Achane, again, the rushing was not good last week, obviously, for anyone. They just did not run the ball well. He'll have better days in that department. But definitely optimistic about the passing game work.
Oh,
was
man.
Great. He was super effective and productive, so that was awesome. And on a week-to-week basis, we're going to be ranking him, as an RB1 if he's out there on the field. But it's just that question. Can this guy hold up going forward and sustain that level of efficiency?
Yeah, we'll see how that works out. All right, we're done with quarterbacks. Let's quickly talk about tight end rankings for week 2, Mike Clay, and start with 1 through 5. Sam Laporta still at 1. Travis Kelce still at 2. Trey McBride, consensus at 3. And then Kyle Pitts all the way up to tight end 4. George Kittle, tight end 5. Yeah, I don't know why I have him at tight end 7. I got to be honest. I'll have to go back.
It's fine. There's a lot of talent in this range. I have no criticism of that.
I think tight end is the biggest overreaction week. Tight end is the biggest overreaction position heading into week 2 just because of the number of duds that you had at the top.
But it was everyone, though. So
I know.
We're moving everyone down? If you move everyone down?
I think I still have Dalton Kincaid in front of him. I think I still have Evan Engram in front of him.
Maybe Andrews.
And
perhaps.
Mark Andrews, I think, is still in front of him. So with that, it's not that I'm not all in on Kyle Pitts. He got in the end zone. You love to see that. You mentioned how many many snaps he played when we were talking about Drake London. But obviously, feeling much better about Kyle Pitts' prospects. Just 1 week into the season, love seeing him get into the end zone.
Yeah, he played 48 of 50 snaps. So, again, that was another very low-volume game. Again, the teams average around 64, and they're all pretty much in that range. You're generally going to be between, like, 59 and 70 on average, 59 for usually, like, bad offenses or very slow-moving offenses like Green Bay or the 49ers, and then there's some offenses that'll push it fast. It'll be up like near 67, 68, like Dallas, for example. Maybe Washington gets there. So, but that's pretty much the range. So 50 is a number that's absurdly low and will be higher. He only had 3 targets in this game.
Didn't love that.
13% target share. We need that number to be higher. But, you know, the Falcons just, after all the excitement all offseason, they had to do this to us.
Yeah, oh, yes.
One Falcon had more than 3 targets in this game. Or over 5 targets in this game. One Falcon had more than 5 targets. You know who that was?
I'm going to guess someone like Olamide Zaccheaus or something like
Basically.
that.
The new Olamide Zaccheaus for the Falcons, Ray McLeod.
Oh, of course.
Only one.
How could I have forgotten
that?
Had
more than 5 targets. Because, of course, they did maybe because Arthur Smith was there. They saw him, and maybe Kirk saw him out of the corner of his eye. Was like, we can't throw to our good players. So we have to get it to, our secondary and 3rd and 4th and 5th targets. So, look, Pitts finding the end zone was great. He was on the field like every down. I feel optimistic he'll kind of deliver the goods this year in fantasy.
Yeah, feeling a lot more excited about Kyle Pitts in spite of how bad that passing game looked and Kirk Cousins, like we said, just week 1. TJ Watt was in the backfield in that game just over and over and over again. You could see a little bit of that limited mobility from Kirk Cousins. Hopefully they can give him a little nicer pocket in Atlanta. But I'm still in on Kyle Pitts being a top 10 tight end like he was.
Yeah, and Eagles this week. So, again, Eagles favored. I think it'll be a little closer than the line suggests, but Pitts is going to be very busy in this game. Atlanta's going to be throwing it. And, again, it's a lighter matchup. They're not playing the Steelers. They're playing an Eagles defense still in transition.
All right, let's talk about tight ends 6 through 10 here in week 2.
All right, here's the fun part.
At 6, Mark Andrews. At 7, Evan Ingram. At 8, Dalton Kincaid. At 9, Brock Bowers. And at 10, Isaiah Likely. Mike Clay, first time since the New England tight ends that I feel like we've got 2 tight ends inside the top 10 from the same team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was New England, and it was like Philly 1 year with Goddard and Ertz, where
that's
a bunch of time, and Goddard kind of bounced back, and they both finished like top 10. I don't think we were ranking them at the same time this high, though. When's the last time we ranked 2 guys in the top 10? You're probably right. It was probably New England. Also, Brock Bowers is on that list, and he's in the same game. So 3 of those 5 guys are playing in the same game. Fascinating topics all around. So let's talk about this, because I'm sticking with Andrews over Likely this week for a few reasons, and part of it is reputation. Andrews has been a top 5 scoring fantasy tight end each of the last 5 seasons. Yep. It's not like he's 37 and lost it. He's still like, 29 years old, or 30 years old. He still has several years left of high-end production. So I'm okay with him. And the other part of this is, in this game, Andrews outsnapped Likely 53-52. He also ran more routes, 26-21. Andrews had missed a lot of practice time. There was reason to believe that maybe he wasn't fully up to speed. We didn't know that for sure going in, but it looked like that.
And Stefan, you mentioned that too with like the big car accident that he had, being able to kind of get back into flow with the game plan with his teammates. And I think obviously in week 2, we expect that to kind of change.
Yeah, and again, he was, I believe there was a stat, I think Nate Yonke from PFF posted this. Andrews was doubled more than he had been at any point, I think, in his career or all of last season, something like that. So the Chiefs' game plan was to shut down Andrews, and that opened the door for Likely, who I don't think the Chiefs were expecting that either. None of us were, to him to play a featured role like that. So Likely is not going away.
No.
But I think this is a rare circumstance in a good offense where both can survive. So Andrews, I still think is a top, certainly a tight end 1, mid-range tight end 1. Maybe he has a huge game and is back to tight end 3 by next week. Likely won't have a game like that. The game script for the Ravens is not always going to be negative, where they're trailing and have to throw the ball, including this week. They're playing the Raiders. They're probably going to be ahead and not have to throw it as much. But I think the priority order is Andrews and Zay Flowers are still top 2 targets in that passing game. Likely should be 3. He should really be next in line as the target priority. So I think Andrews, again, mid-range tight end 1, Likely more of a back-end tight end 1, fringe tight end 1, but it might be a little inconsistent.
I think it's going to be tough, and I think this is like a Liz Loza line, but it's going to be tough to put this genie back in the bottle with Isaiah Likely now that they've seen it. And it's not like this is the first time that he's done this. I mean, last year we saw the athleticism and production at a number of points when Mark Andrews was out. Isaiah Likely had more 18-point fantasy weeks than Mark Andrews did last year. You want to talk about some of those boom games and what he can be, especially as an end zone target for Lamar Jackson with that big body that he has. The idea that if his big toe was literally just like a half an inch shorter, he would have had a second touchdown in this one. It was an unbelievable week one, and it just feels wrong for me to have him ranked at tight end 10 because I want to have him so much higher. But you laid out a bunch of reasons why it makes sense that we should kind of pump the brakes on this kind of production week in and week out for him.
Yeah, it's just tough because you think about the absolute best pass-catching tight ends in the NFL, and they don't come anywhere close to what Likely did in week one. And that's enough to get him on your roster and consider him for your lineup. But we got to, he's going to come back to earth. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of to what extent. And when there's not a lot of pass volume, and there's usually not, Lamar Jackson is generally low in pass attempts each season because they do so much with the run. It might be a balanced offense, but he's still going to scramble a lot and take attempts away, and that's going to lead to down games for the secondary receivers on this game. That's why Marquise Brown never really had an elite fantasy season, even though he was seeing big target shares. Mark Andrews is really the only one that's been able to do it, to be an elite fantasy option, and that's because he's at a position where there aren't many guys like that. So, again, you just got to be realistic, but make sure he's at least on your bench. Maybe, a fringe tight end one. If you had David Njoku and you got him, and Njoku, of course, expected to miss a little time. That's like a perfect fill-in for now.
Yeah, we'll see what happens also with Dallas and Jake Ferguson. Hopefully he is going to be able to be there.
Sounds like he'll play, but, could have a setback.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to be really quick about this because we've reached the end of the show. But if you looked at tight ends 11 through 15, if you weren't able to get Isaiah Likely and you've got a guy like David Njoku, you've got to replace him at the tight end spot. Do you have a guy in that third range where you would be like, man, let me still go out and grab him off of waivers?
Yeah, so 4 catches, 47 yards, 0 touchdowns. That's enough for tight end 7 in week one. And that, of course, was Colby Parkinson for the Rams. Just a gross week. But that's a guy I'd look at. 5 targets last week. That was tied for 5th most among tight ends. He's a guy, if you're in trouble, he might be your best option off waivers.
Okay, love that. Mike, this was fun.
Yeah,
we haven't gotten to do a two-person show in a minute, and I feel like the time just flew by. I appreciate being able to share this time with you.
So much info, though. We got to a lot of dudes there.
Yeah, you and I are going to be back tomorrow. You know what we're going to do tomorrow? Thursday Night Football preview. The first part of our Week 2 preview as well. For Mike Clay, my name is Daniel Dopp. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. And Fantasy Focus Football is presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. We love you guys. Mike and I will see you on Thursday.
Bills Dolphins. Let's go.